Hello, hello. Welcome back for Positive Talk number 2 today. Super excited about this one. We just got off of a quick call before jumping on here, so we got to connect a little bit before we jumped on this call. So super excited to be going live today. The journey to the book that she has put out. Super excited because it's something I'm passionate about as well. There we go. How are you?
Hello.
I love the glasses.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was just looking at my camera and I noticed that my eyes are like, whatever light is hitting them right now is making them like the exact same color as my hoodie. So I was like, this is fun.
That is fun.
Now when people ask me what color my eyes are, I'm going to just be like, whatever color this hoodie is right here.
Yeah. Or maybe it depends what color hoodie you're wearing.
Yeah. It's the trees and everything else around me that's also reflecting.
Couldn't be
Awesome.
a better color.
Awesome. Well, I will let you introduce yourself so people know who you are, and then we can kind of dive into a conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I'm Tracy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the founder of Indigo Journey and the author of my brand new book, It's About You Too. I'm a social worker, coach, health and wellness coach, and life coach. And I mainly focus on supporting people in the LGBTQIA plus community and their parents. Not always at the same time, often, separate parents and separate queer community members. So that's the short version of what I do, but I'm sure we'll go into more detail as we
Yeah.
get into the chat.
As soon as I saw the title of your book and then I was reading a little bit about what it was topic around, I was just like, this is something that I am super passionate about, and I love that someone else is out there doing this type of work as well, because I think that a lot of times during the coming out process, a lot of the focus is on the actual member of the LGBT community who is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's a journey for everyone else who's involved as well. And sometimes
Absolutely.
those emotions can be ignored or maybe looked at in a more negative light. And I think that it's
Mm,
important to kind of give some positive light to those people, because, I mean, especially if that person has had a vision of what their child, what their family member, what their loved one's life is going to be like, and then it kind of gets flipped upside down. And
yeah.
that's like a journey for them as well. So I loved the title of your book. So can you tell us a little bit like of the journey of getting to writing a book with that type of topic?
Yeah, for sure. So I started off working with 10 to 25-year-old queer people, young people, and I did that for many, many years. And over the time, I'd have parents contact me saying, you know, I know you can't support me, but can you recommend someone that can? And at the time, I didn't have anyone that I could recommend. We didn't even have a peer group, support group in our community at the time. And so I ended up advocating within my workplace. I was working in a youth specific space, but I ended up advocating with my workplace that I needed to be able to have some space to support parents as well, because when parents are doing well, then their kids are more likely to do well as well. And often parents are just looking for extra information, some support, some validation and acknowledgement for their own feelings, and then they're more able to support their parents. Support their kids. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I became interested in supporting parents, because I could see the difference. I would be working with the young people. I'd have one conversation with parents and I could see a significant difference, as could their school, in their behavior, in their mood, in their ability to walk around the world as their true selves. So, that to me felt like, if we can, so my passion is to improve the experience of LGBTQIA plus people in the world, generally speaking. And if we can help parents become more on board so that family life, home life, is safer, feels more loving, that unconditional love. I mean, most or all parents probably love their kids. Like, I know that parents love their kids. It's just whether or not that message is getting across to them and to the kids, and whether or not the kids have the message that this love is conditional or unconditional is often the case. So I think that if we can provide a space where parents can do better, and they can feel confident and comfortable in the way they're supporting their child. A lot of parents, they're doing well, but they're not sure if they're doing well. So sometimes it's just about reassuring them and supporting them in that kind of case. So when I started my business, it was to provide counseling and health and wellness coaching for queer adults. That was the intent of the start of my business. But I just couldn't let go of the parent side of things. So now I've kind of split it, 50-50 almost, that I work with parents on one side and with queer community on the other side. And so the book came about because I was being told by so many parents, and it just was like, I don't know, it's heartbreaking each time I would hear that parents are being told by family members, by friends, by even by peers in support groups, by professionals, so GPs and mental health professionals, their therapists, whoever, that they needed to put their feelings aside, that it's not about you, it's about your child. You just have to put your feelings aside and be there to support your child. And whilst I agree with a part of that, like, it is about their child, it is their life and their experience, but we can't put our feelings aside.
Yeah.
And you especially can't ask a parent to put their feelings aside when it comes to their child. So that's where the title came from. It was a direct response to that. It is about you too. So it is about your child, but it's about you too. And it's important for you to have the support so that you can do the work that you need to do and be there for your child to support them.
Yeah, I love that, because I can remember the process of me coming out, and I'm a very empathetic person. I'm a recovering people pleaser. So for me, I naturally still cared about my family and how they were handling the whole process of me coming out. But at that age, I was not educated enough to answer a lot of the questions that they have, and definitely didn't have the emotional intelligence to help them process the things that they were feeling. And when I kind of started that journey of learning more about myself, the community I was a part of, I started coming into contact with younger people who were in the process of coming out. And they were asking if I'd be willing to talk to parents for them, because I was a freshman counselor. When I was there, my honors professor asked me to not only disclose my major and what year I was, but also say, and I'm a part of the LGBT community. I was a pretty shy person at that time. So announcing in front of all the incoming freshmen that I was gay was still...
Yeah, that's an interesting request.
It was still pretty like, okay, that's kind of scary, but I did it, and it opened up an avenue for me that was really eye-opening, because through the journey of educating myself more to be able to speak on it better, as well as hearing so many different queer stories that I probably would have never heard had I not jumped into that role, it was definitely a thing that kind of just boosted me up into a space of, wow, I've got a lot of capabilities to help people around me. But a lot of times I felt like I was leaning more towards helping the adults understand something than helping the kid kind of understand their life and being part of the LGBT community. And I became really passionate about that. I grew up with a Christian upbringing. So I have a mission of, I would rather create 1 million imperfect allies out in the world than have just a few that would consider themselves closer to a perfect ally, because the LGBT, we exist everywhere. And I would
Mm-hmm.
rather have a ally in the grocery store or in the parking lot where we need an ally to stand up for a kid who doesn't have anyone yet to
Yeah.
stand up for them than just have one in a community that's overworked and starting to resent even confessing to being an ally. Because
Yeah.
a lot of times allies get thrown under the bus, parents get thrown under
Yeah.
the bus. You were talking about the experience of coworkers and stuff. When I came out, my mom's therapist and other people around were trying to convince my parents that it was their best choice to try to guide me back into the closet, shut
Mm.
that door and lock it tight, instead of, hey, this is a journey. Let's learn how to accept and love. Thankfully, my mom was someone very strong in that process of accepting and loving me no matter what. But I've been through many relationships with where my boyfriends come out to their family. And that was even more hard for me to go through
Mm.
because
You're
I'm like, oh gosh,
witnessing.
it's like someone I love, but I also want to be understanding that the parents' world is about to shift.
Mm.
But I want to be there to support and protect my significant other. And it's just like, I was willing to put myself as like a wall to be hit with whatever hate or miscommunication would pop up and show love to everyone. It's not the easiest place to stand, but I was willing to do that because the person I love was about to share their most authentic self with people that were very important to them.
Mm. Mm. That's pretty incredible that you were prepared to do that. But you're right in the sense that parents' worlds can be turned upside down. Even parents that are, I've supported parents who are like, they consider themselves to be very open, very supportive. They consider themselves to be allies of the community. They've got friends, etc., etc. And then their child comes out, whether even when it's expected, even when people have sensed that maybe, their child might be part of the community, they get these overwhelming feelings and then are shocked that they have these feelings, and then kind of feel a bit guilty and give themselves a hard time, and it's like, we're confused, like where did these feelings come from? Like, I've got, my best friend is gay, or like, how, whatever their connection is to the queer community. And then when their child, and they know that they're going to love and support their child no matter what. So there's no question there, but there are these feelings, and a lot of it is connected to fear and worry and concern for them. And also, like you said, with the turning the world upside down, a lot of parents have expectations or dreams or hopes for their child. Sometimes they're conscious of them, and sometimes they're not so conscious of them. And they only become conscious once they get this new information that is complete opposite to what they were expecting. And like a lot of parents I've spoken to are like, I hadn't even thought about my kids getting married or having kids, or but all of a sudden they come out and I'm like, oh, that means I'm not going to be a grandparent. But that hadn't entered their conscious mind yet. So that we talk about surprise and shock, but I think often people are talking about it on a more surface level and not really realizing the depth of where that can be. And we look at people sometimes, I think, they're either this side or they're this side. They're either for or they're against, where there's, lots of people that are at the for side, for want of a different term, but they're still not managing that well, or they're managing okay, but they could manage a lot better. And what I know from having been on the other side and working with a lot of young queer people, that they read into those feelings, those thoughts, those, like, parents give off all different types of, I mean, like all of us do, lots of different types of body language and facial expressions, etc., etc. And kids, especially when they're pre-coming out and after they've come out, they're on such high alert. And I think, and I often say to parents, your kids have got the best BS radar, so you need to be honest, but also not burden your child with your struggles. So when you get the support elsewhere, that means you're not going to burden your child with your struggles, but you can still be honest with
Yeah.
them, because when you're not honest with them, they'll see straight through it and they'll make up their own story about what it is, and it's usually a lot worse than what the reality actually
Yeah.
is.
My boyfriend just came out to his family last year in December, and their response was just like so beautiful that like I wish more LGBT students had, or community members could have had an experience like that, where like it definitely shifted. They weren't expecting that. I think they said that they had conversations of it being a possibility, but I don't think that they had put focus on that. But they instantly responded with like, "We love you," but still gave the response of, "This is going to take some time for us to understand." And they went out of their way to like look into information, and they went out of their way to like kind of inform other family members. So it wasn't all on my boyfriend to do that. And their response was like, no matter what, we're going to love our kid, and it's us against the world. It's not going to be the world against my kid.
Yeah.
And like I was sitting there because like I knew how important family was to him. So like I was like, I'm ready for whatever, but I really hope this goes well. And I recently got to meet them, and it was such a beautiful experience for me because mine wasn't as great. My mom was amazing. I'd had a previous boyfriend's mother who considered me Satan because I corrupted and took her son to the dark side. So I've had the experience on
You've
both
had
sides.
both, yeah.
So it was like, okay, I'm preparing for whatever may come. But it was beautiful to me that they asked for the space and time to like digest what was just given to them. And a lot of parents don't give that reaction.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get them in a point of shock where some things may be said that are regretted later.
Oh, yes.
And even accepting parents can accidentally kind of put something out that it hurts a lot more coming from someone you love and are really hoping it's acceptance. But then we kind of talked before, we jumped on the live of like, when I was coming out, all I wanted was just acceptance. I didn't want questions. I didn't want to be interrogated, like maybe you just haven't met the right girl, or all the other things
or
that are
maybe it's
very
a phase,
stereotypical.
or you're not old enough to know.
So it's just like, it's definitely interesting, and I love that you are kind of creating space for that, because I think that there are a lot of parents, and like we kind of talked about before, it's hard to kind of get your content in front of the right people, because it's not like these people are a part of a geographical group of people where they're all here so you can just drop your book on the table. It's all about the algorithms, and if they can find it on the internet or know where, like which shelf to go searching for the right type of book. But
so true.
So with that journey, because we talked a little bit about algorithms, and when it came to like my friends and I searching what is a transgender person, and the algorithms will give us very different things when we search that, depending on what our search history is. Whereas I'm LGBT, I'm very open-minded, liberal. So my search brought me to LGBTQ centers to educate you on that. Whereas someone who may be more conservative may be more tied to like biblical or religious aspects of things. They're going to get a whole different type of search result, where the definition of trans for them is going to be bathrooms, sports, things that give a very negative light to the community.
We need to change them.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm still in shock that you both got such a different response. And like I said to you before, when you said that, it makes perfect sense because I understand how the algorithms work, but it had never entered my mind that people could search the exact same words and get such completely different results. Yeah,
Yeah. The internet, it thinks it knows what we want, and it's just like,
yeah,
if you're a loving mother and you're a churchgoer and you watch Fox News, like the search results are going to give you something a lot more shocking when it comes to searching about your LGBT child that you're trying to understand and like accept and love for who they are. You want to be the best parent, but the internet's not working for you if your past search
yeah.
results weren't there to kind of aid that search. So when it
And
comes to,
it's more likely to feed into the fear that you're probably already experiencing, rather than support you to work through that fear
yeah,
and get some accurate information.
yeah,
It's so scary to think.
yeah. And I mean, we kind of talked about like, how do we get your book or your business into the right hands of people? And
Yeah,
I think it's just like you said at the beginning of the live, like, it's not easy to kind of build community or like have a group of people that understand what your mission is. It's just like getting people to kind of put it out there and like, hey, I mean, as a content creator online, I have a lot of people saying, hey, I just came out. Is there any literature that you know that would be great to give to my parents? And there isn't a lot out there, surprisingly, when it comes to helping parents.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the more we can find, the better it is to have those resources ready when we need to hand them out to people.
Yeah, and like I was saying to you when we were chatting just before, I mean, there are a handful of books out there that I'm aware of. Some of them, though, are parents' stories, like so their experience, which are fantastic and really helpful, I think, for parents to know, oh, someone else has gone through something similar to me and they're having similar feelings. So I think those books are really, really important. As far as books that actually name and work through, like from a therapeutic perspective, what help you work through some of those things, there's really not a lot out there. But what I've found is, even on Amazon, I can search a variation of parent of LGBT child, and my book will come up as, say, let's say number 3 in the search, and I'll do a different variation of it and it won't be in the search at all, but I'm still asking the exact same thing. So it is hard. So unless you know the exact title in advance and you can put that search in, you're not guaranteed to find. I know, like, lots of you do the search for parents of LGBT, however you want to word that, and there's a whole bunch of books that are actually intended for the queer community and queer adults. Like, there is also queer kids books, and there's a whole bunch of different things. So it's kind of interesting to me that's the way the searching is happening. So thank you for having me on your
Yeah,
live, so we can work towards getting the word out there that there are actually not just my book. There are some other things out there. So it is important for people, when they are searching, to try different variations of what they're looking for. And like you've said about, if you haven't already searched in this area, your search is likely to be very different. So being mindful of that, to kind of keep searching, I think,
yeah,
and being creative in the words that you're using in your searches as well.
yeah. I
Yeah, yeah,
know there were lots of times when I would be searching for something to give to people. And you're right, when it comes to children versus kids versus my gay son, my gay daughter, like all
youth,
of these things,
teens.
it's, you get completely different search results. I started using like ChatGPT to be like, list off 100 ways to say this phrase, just so
Oh,
I
that's a
could
great
start
idea.
searching things and be like, oh, I would have never thought to search that, but there are people searching. And then, of course, there's lots of apps you can type in and see like Google SEO stuff to see
Mm.
like what is trending more so than others. Because when I was building my coaching business and I was like, okay, self-empowerment coach, I'd be one in like 6 billion people over here searching, I'd never show up. Whereas like I
Yeah.
can start to like manipulate the titles a little bit to make my search results pull me up a little higher to where at least I might pop up on the first or second page of a Google search. But yeah, it's on the age of the internet, it's important to kind of understand that, and working with audiences that may not be like, hey, I'm going to promote your book because it was so amazing, because they're still thinking, oh, what will other people think if I promote this? Like
Yeah.
that also makes it harder for your type of work to get out there, because it's like, okay, how do I get people to share this? How do I get this title out there for more people to find it when the internet's not making it that easy anymore?
Yeah, and when the people who are benefiting from it are not confident or comfortable enough to share that. And people don't know that they can do that kind of thing anonymously on some platforms. Like at Amazon, you can do a review anonymously and in different things like that. But so it makes it harder for parents or people who want the support and need the support to actually find it. And I think it's really important to make that point, because what we're saying here is, even though it might feel like there is no support out there, there is. It's just a matter of finding it. So persevering, you know, working your way through the dredges of the internet, you will end up finding something. And it makes more sense to me now why people say it's so hard to find someone to support me. It's brilliant. And then, you know, if we're talking about therapists or coaches, you don't know just from what they put on their website or on their Instagram whether or not you're going to connect with them as well. So offering, I don't know if you do that for your coaching, but I always offer a free, like a consult call. I like just to have a chat and see whether we're a good fit, and make sure that people feel really comfortable before they commit. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I search like LGBT coaches, LGBT therapists, LGBT doctors, because I'm looking for people who can understand what I'm speaking about, and me not have to be the professor on LGBT studies every place I go to work with people. Because a lot of times that is a mountain to climb that someone who's not part of the community doesn't understand. A lot of times they're talking about what's on the other side of the mountain. I'm still over here trying to climb the mountain to get to where they're trying to help me. And I think that the more resources we can find, because even here, I'm in a city, I go to DC, capital of the United States, LGBT spaces in bookstores are so small. Like the ones here, you get one shelf, not shelf, you get one row of books. And a lot of them, because I've pretty much read all the ones on the shelf that we have, they're not really the content that I'm seeking for to give to other people. Maybe it's the history. That's great. It's important to understand the history, but not necessary for a parent who's trying to understand their child. It might terrify them more hearing the full history of LGBT community and their journey.
Well, and a lot of parents already have a lot of information about, maybe not a lot, but like some information, the scariest information about the history, which is what feeds into their fear as well. So, and then when we, you know, the current climate as well is just kind of reinforcing some of those fears, I think.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that comes across parents' minds when children come out to them, is like, ooh, this is a dangerous world to be in and be different. I want to protect you. How can I protect you? And I don't know anything about protecting an LGBT person in this way. And then of course you don't want to hurt your children if you are accepting. So it's like, how can I be accepting but protective and like not scare them of the world?
It's such a big juggle for parents. I hear that all of the time, where parents are uncertain, and I guess that's why I talk about supporting parents to become more comfortable and confident, because they're often so uncertain with exactly what you're just talking about. Like, if I affirm them in their identity that they're sharing with me, is that, like, I know that's supportive in some ways, but also, is it going to harm them? Are they better off to, hide or stay quiet or till this time? Or if we're talking about trans or non-binary kids, like, are they better off to wait until they're 18? Because, like all of the things, we don't need to go into details of that, it's all over the media. But the reality is, if kids feel seen, heard, loved and supported unconditionally, then they're going to do much better in the world, which is exactly why I do this work, so that parents can feel like they know how to best support their child, and they can make sure not only that they are loving and supporting their child unconditionally, because I know parents love and support their child. They're doing their best with the information that they have. My role is to give them maybe more information, maybe more accurate information to what they have, so that they can make sure that how they feel is the message that their child is receiving. Because so often their child will be like, reading in between the lines that we were talking about earlier. They fill in the gaps when parents are not confident, and they might assume that there's conditions to that love or conditions to that support, and maybe there is at this point in time, and that's part of the growth and development for parents. And maybe there's not, but they're just not getting the message across in that way. So kids, even you were mentioning before, parents can, even the most supportive, they can make mistakes when their kids come out, and even a minute silence after a child has shared can be perceived as, my parent is not happy with me, or they don't agree, or they're not okay with this, or they fill in that little gap with their own fears. And so when parents can learn like what happens in that circumstance, and so then what they can do about it, and it's really about having I guess really clear, open communication, so there aren't those gaps that get filled by assumptions on either side. I mean, it can happen both ways for sure. And the other thing, like, whilst we're talking about maybe making some mistakes that aren't intentional, or maybe they are, because you don't know better, the important thing for parents to understand, if they are watching today, is that there is always room for repair.
Yeah.
There's always, like, I've spoken to some, lots of queer folk, even older adults, whose coming out experience was not great, who maybe are even distanced from their families to this day, or they've got friends who are, and every single one of them would, if I ask them the question, which I often do, if we had a magic wand in relation to your family or in relation to your parents, what would happen? They all say, if that magic wand could repair, like could have their parents do, whatever it is that, repairing whatever damage that's been done in their experience, then that would be their wish. Yeah. And so, no matter what's going on, I think almost every family can be repaired and reconnected if the parents are prepared to put in the work. And I know it takes two to tango, but because of the role of a parent in their child's life, regardless of age, it is their job.
Yeah.
To be doing the work first. And the child will definitely need to do some healing work as well. But I think most of them would be inclined to do that once they get a sense that it's worth it, in a sense, like that, that their parents are doing the work too. So they could actually get their family back, or get it back to how it used to be, or how they want it to be.
Yeah, I think. Yep.
I was just going to say, so there is hope.
Yeah.
No matter what.
I think one thing that I try to help people understand when it comes to the LGBT community and loving and accepting people in the community is like removing sexual tension of that conversation around sex because that's not something a lot of people in the straight community communicate with their parents. It's not something that a lot of gay people want to communicate with their parents either. I think because our community is so I mean, to be a part of our community, that topic is part of the conversation. You are sexually attracted to the same sex, or you're identifying other than straight, presenting cis. And I think that conversation, because sex is so taboo to talk about, that LGBT almost becomes taboo. I know that when I was working for a company, they talked about helping other organizations, and then when I suggested like the Trevor Project or something that helped LGBT, they're like, oh, we can't, that's too political. And I'm like, if my community can't get assistance from anyone because we're too political, we're too sexualized, like we're putting so many taboos around the community when it comes to the conversations that should be had, that heal, that remove trauma, that fixes things. I think that there's a lot of taboo around the topic of even speaking about it, to where it's just like, okay, I was taught that this is not okay to talk about. So automatically when a parent's trying to talk to a kid, there's that wall of awkwardness, because I had to I worked for the health department for a little bit, and I was the prep coordinator. I had to learn how to dissolve the awkwardness and shame that was in my mind when it came to talking about those types of topics.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to LGBT, the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind is, we're going to have to talk to them about sex. And that's not an easy topic, because if you think about it, we don't talk about it in other places either.
Yeah, that's so true. And the reality is, sexuality and gender identity are not about sex. So like someone who's part of the queer community, you know, they are quite possibly going to become at some stage, if they're not already, sexually active. But their sexuality and or their gender identity is not about sex. So, you know, I mean, part of sexuality can be connected to sexual attraction, of course, but that's not the core part of it. And so we don't actually, you know, and I talk to parents about this often, you don't have to talk about sex with your child. Because your child has come out does not mean that they are having sex or ready to have sex. It could be. What I encourage parents to talk about is healthy relationships and consent.
Yes.
And if they're not, because we all should be able to talk about that, because that's not gendered, although part of it could, when we talk about consent, we won't get into that, but there, you know, there's that side of it. But really, we all should be able to have healthy conversations around healthy relationships and around consent. And then when it comes to the birds and the bees, like literally talking about sex, if parents are straight and cis, they might not have the accurate information. So maybe they're not equipped to have a well-informed conversation about sex, but they can support their child to access services and support and resources so that they can do that. And if you're not comfortable talking about sex, talking about healthy relationships and consent is going to be a huge help for your child to make sure that they are able to have the kinds of conversations that they need to have with potential sexual partners, so that they can have the best chance of being safe and respected and supported and loved in those environments. And that, I think you're absolutely right. We kind of go, sex, can't talk about that. Oh, that's awkward. I don't want to talk to my kids about sex. I don't even want to think about my kids having sex. Which is, you know, okay, fair. Well, and in a lot of ways, like where their brain's going, nor should they. It's kind of not any of their business. But what is their business is being responsible around the healthy version, because otherwise kids are getting it from places that are not healthy and not accurate. And you know, if any parent who thinks their kid's not going to access porn, they're kidding themselves.
Yeah.
Because if they're not getting the information from appropriate places, then they've got to look for it somewhere. And unfortunately, there's plenty of access on the internet, and most of it is, like, I'm not saying that porn's wrong for everybody, but in order to have your education around sex, it's not a great place to get your education, because
Yeah.
most of it's not accurate. So yeah, making sure that you can have conversations around relationships, healthy relationships. What does that look like? What is consent? How do we make sure that we're giving and being open to consent, like listening, you know, all of those things. Doesn't have to be awkward, but you're right, like it just gets all smacked under that big umbrella of, oh, it's sex, we can't talk about it.
Yeah. I've always told people, I'm like, I feel like when people find out I'm gay, the first thing they think about is me having sex with my partner. And I'm like, that does not happen anywhere else. And it's very
Exactly.
interesting because, like, you were talking about, like, having safe conversations around consent and healthy boundaries in relationships. Like, that can be had with self-worth, that can be had with, because a lot of times if you feel rejection from everyone around you that was your support system growing up, you do throw yourself into accepting maybe not the healthiest terms with other people, because it's like, I have nothing to go back to, so I have to find something, and anything will do at this moment because right now I have nothing. And there are so many very unhealthy places. Unfortunately, our community has a lot of trauma, and trauma creates a lot of unsafe situations for a lot of people. And I think that if parents understood that, hey, like, it's safer for you to maybe walk yourself through, how can I have these conversations that may be uncomfortable and awkward, to better protect my child and inform them of the world they're about to step into. Because, I mean, younger people, there are older people out there that will give them misinformation or whatever manipulated information they need to hear to get what they want. And younger people and people who are new stepping into that don't have anything to compare it to. And we've already said the internet will give you whatever you search. So there's information confirming every aspect inside you want to try to argue.
Yeah, so true. And it's, to be honest, it's not just younger people. When we're rejected by family or our loved ones, or even not necessarily going as far as being rejected, just being kind of sent that message that there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough the way I am, and those kinds of things, then we set the bar really low when we go into intimate relationships. So not only do we feel like we have to stay because there's nothing better out there, because, you know, I've lost everybody, or nobody cares, or whatever, also we set the bar low, and that's dangerous for kids. So yeah, having those conversations, I think, is really, really important. And it doesn't have to be difficult. And, you know, like, I've worked with a lot of parents around these kinds of conversations. They're like, well, how do I have that conversation now? Because I don't know. I'm straight. I've never, or I'm cis. I've never. And like, it's all about just bringing it back to the basics. Like, we're talking about humanity, talking about human interactions. It doesn't, you might not know the ins and outs exactly when we do talk about, like, having sex or really intimate experiences, but we don't need to have, I mean, that would also be helpful, to be honest. But when I've walked parents through those conversations, and just, you know, them being able to have, you know, approach their kids with openness around those conversations, it's made such a difference in their relationship on all levels, because all of a sudden their child feels seen and heard. And that includes when you're talking to a teen, for example, who's just like, "Ah, don't say that, mum," or "Dad,
Yeah.
I don't want to hear you talk about that." Ones that are like really shut down and like, "We are not talking about this." I say to parents in those circumstances, do it anyway, respectfully, do it anyway, because they're still going to hear you. Even though they're going to feel really uncomfortable and awkward, they're still getting the message that you care enough. And whatever, like if they're shutting down and they are, covering their ears or whatever, you can just say to them, "Okay, so I understand this is an uncomfortable conversation, but I need you to hear just these two things. Or I need you to just hear this one thing. Don't worry, I won't talk about sex in detail if that's uncomfortable, but I need you to hear," and then you pick what are your two key messages that you want to get across as far as your child being safe and respected and respecting their intimate partners. It just makes such a difference. And they'll, run out of the room and be like, whatever. But I can guarantee you they'll take that advice and it might mean the world of difference for them in intimate relationships in the future. And it will definitely mean a big difference in your relationship with them. And they'll probably, when they're 30 or something, you'll all have a giggle about that, that awkward conversation. And, they might even give you a hard time because you were like awkward about it or weird about it or whatever they might say. But it makes a difference and it's important.
Yeah. It's interesting because even after I became more comfortable with communicating and talking on the topic, I was able to like verbalize what I was like not okay with and what I was okay with. Whereas like before, even like in the act, I was like, there was some shame there. There was some like, oh, I don't know if I have the right. I don't know if this person will still love me. Like there were so many thoughts because that were silenced because it was never spoken to me in a way that made me feel like I had the right to be verbal and say what I was thinking. And I think that when you remove that shame, when you remove the awkwardness, the uncomfortable, and just tell them like, hey, like your safety is important. What feels good or bad to you is important. You are important. Like you're a part of this equation. And if something's happening you don't want to happen, you have every right to say no, stop, whatever needs to be said. But when we don't talk about it, when we talk about it in a way that's negative, it does create a lot of situations where things can be very unsafe for any individual that has not kind of gotten that talk in a healthy way.
It's so true. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking, it is literally what we're taught, generally speaking, in society, that sex is a physical act. And we're also taught that talking about it is weird and awkward, so we don't do it. So many people, especially in their earlier experiences, are not having a conversation beforehand with their potential intimate partner. And so therefore, they can't find out from each other what's okay and what's not before you even get started. And I know, like, I don't expect like people that are in a new, their first experience or first couple of experiences, they're going to sit down and have this, deep and meaningful conversation about. Well, exactly, but to know that it is perfectly normal, and in fact, it's encouraged to use your words as well, whether it's beforehand, during, or after, I think is really important. And we're not kind of programmed that way because so much of the messaging is, sex is physical, words are awkward when we can't join the two together. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I did want to, you mentioned something before, and I did want to kind of touch a little bit on, so we're talking about sexual safety here, but also talking about kids' mental health and, the risks the queer community is well and truly overrepresented in all of the kind of the risk areas. And I like to touch on that and make sure people understand that those risks are not a result of their sexuality or their gender identity. They're as a result of their experiences or their fear or perceived experiences. So they're concerned about being rejected or, you know, abused or any of those kinds of things, or their actual experiences. That's what causes the risk. So the flip side of that is for parents that, yes, that it can be scary out there. Yes, being queer is not the easiest road for your child to take necessarily as far as the outside world is concerned. However, it is the better road for them to be out and open to whatever they're comfortable being, and being able to live as their authentic self and be unconditionally loved and supported by everybody else around them, because that places them in the best place to be able to take on any of the struggles that they might come across in the outside world. So I just wanted to make sure that we cover that element of it, because going back to what we were saying about parents like being uncertain about, do I affirm them, do I not, what do I do, what's the best way to support them, am I, you know, encouraging them to do things that maybe are going to be harmful for them? And the reality is, like, they need to be able to be their authentic selves, and whatever they're telling you about themselves in this moment is authentic for them in this moment, and that's what they need to know, that they're loved and supported unconditionally as themselves in this moment. It just makes I guess life a lot easier for them when they're not having to try and hide or trying to fight, you know, fight to be themselves in their own home or within their own families. And I've seen that time and time again with kids, you know, ones that can be, because I worked in a small city back home in Australia, and you know, I worked with a lot of queer kids that were in the same schools and even in the same year levels and sometimes in the same classes, and their experiences would be very, very different. And one of, not all of, but one of the key factors there was whether or not they could feel like they could live authentically as themselves. And you know, often that comes from family, but it also comes from friendship groups, and it comes from, you know, the way teaching staff and etc. are behaving in schools, and obviously a bunch of other things as well. But one of the key parts is when parents are 100% behind them. Yeah, they've got their back. They know they do. And so then they don't have to worry. They might have to worry in other parts of their life, but they don't have to worry within their family. And when they go home, they've got that safe space. It's so important.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like living your most authentic life, that for anyone, even people who aren't part of the LGBT community, that's the route you want to take. And
absolutely,
as a parent, like, stay curious, like, ask questions.
Yes.
Like, as a coach, I always tell people, I'm like, instead of trying to give the answers, stay curious and just keep asking questions, because a lot of times we can come up with the answers for ourselves. We're just also wanting love and acceptance from you as a parent. So if you can just remain curious, and curious in a way of like asking them to better explain like how they're feeling, and instead of trying to find answers for yourself, stay curious about them in a way that is engaging and accepting and loving, because when it comes to going out into the world, the best gift anyone can have is to not be fighting an internal battle as well. Because the world's going to give you a lot of things to like fight and stand up for, but you don't want that happening internally as well. Like self-love, self-acceptance, all of that, that's so important when it comes to navigating the world. Because like we said, it's a lot easier to say no to toxic things if you have self-love and self-acceptance, because you don't need validation from the wrong things. You don't need things to numb what's going on in here. because it's a healthier space in there than it is out in the.
Yeah. So, so true. So true. And I love the way you say stay curious, remembering that the questions that you're asking are about your child, about their experience, about their feelings, about their likes, their dislikes, like all of the things in their life. It doesn't have to be just about their sexuality or gender identity. Making sure it's not you getting an education, an LGBTQIA plus education
Yeah.
from your child, like get that somewhere else, but be curious about them. And I think the other part of that is making sure you're not avoiding topics of conversation because you're afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, or using the wrong words. Again, you can get your education to try and build your confidence and comfortability around all of that, but being curious and having conversations is the way that that's going to come about.
Yeah.
For sure.
And like,
And I know, like, lots of young people I've spoken with, it's like I came out, but it's like it's a non-event. It's like there's this awkward silence now in my home because and then if I speak to the parents, it's because everyone's too scared to say the wrong thing, or they're waiting for their child to bring the conversation up again. And which is, I say this in the kindest possible way, it's really not fair. Your child's already had to make the hugest step by coming out to you. Don't make them have to come out again by starting, bringing the conversation forward. You can do that and create those stepping stones. And of course, not making sexuality and gender identity the only topic of conversation, but we I think people often kind of then get withdrawn and like through that fear of, oh, is it okay to talk about that? Or can I say this or can I say that? And yeah, take a breath.
mm-hmm.
Get some support so you've got some guidance and you're not feeling so anxious and stressed about it.
Yeah, and a lot of times, like, kids are coming out a lot younger than they were before. They're able to, because they have access to those like titles and labels that they can identify with and understand. But asking questions also allows the child to kind of educate you on where they're at in the understanding of what it means to be LGBT, because sometimes when you're thinking a child at the age of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, 10 or 11, like there's a lot of information they're gaining at these ages that we are looking at very differently as adults. So part of staying curious is also like flipping it back around to them and being like, I want to know your understanding of being LGBT, because sometimes kids say that they're part of the community just because a girl likes a toy truck and a boy likes a Barbie, and society has taught us that Barbies are for girls, trucks are for boys. So in a child's mind, they hear something where boy that likes boy, girl that likes girl. Sometimes it can be a misunderstanding there. So it's just like making sure that you take the time to discover what their understanding of all the labels that they're hearing and using mean to them as a child. And then, of course, there's so many different levels of how people identify. There are so many people who identify as bi, who come out as gay, later are trans, who do drag but are still gay. Or there's so many different things, whereas
variation.
You just have to stay curious and ask and just continue to show love through the whole process, because that's all they're really looking for. We can be a lot more forgiving when there's misunderstandings, as long as the overall message that we're like receiving is, I'm going to love you through all of this. I may not understand it all because this is not my journey. This is not the experience I had, but I'm going to love you through whatever this journey like does for you. I'm here.
Yeah. And I'm going to do the work so that I can understand the best that I can from my lived experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think just on what you were saying about kids like young kids, you know, people know, people learn what gender identity is without the language from a very young age. 2-3 year olds, they're getting the idea of what gender identity means. They're getting the very strong messaging, you know, from day one, really, about what gender means, in the sense of, you know, pink for girls, blue for boys. It's very strong in a lot of our cultures. And also we know ourselves, we know who, you know, our gender identity within ourselves at a very young age. Can we articulate it? Some can, some can't. But you're right, like, just because somebody's liking something that's considered a different gender, so just because someone is being creative, like a young child is being creative around their gender identity, doesn't mean that the end result when they're 25, let's say, is going to be that they're trans. It could, but having those conversations and staying curious and keeping them open, not trying to box them in any direction, is really important. Kids can play, I mean, the same as any identity. Kids can, I mean, it's part of the developmental stages in childhood, early teens, older teens, young adulthood, is to figure out your identity, and you know, sexuality and gender is part of that. It's also important to realize that when someone's telling you that this is how they feel and this is what their experience is to believe them, because that's what they're feeling in that moment. And you know, that, I mean, one of the most common questions I get asked is, isn't it a phase? Or is it a phase? Or it is just a phase. Sometimes it's not a question, it's a statement. And it's because they're too young to know. And I get that for parents of kids that are 5, and I get them for parents of kids that are 18. So, you know, it's all kind of relative, but whether or not it's a phase is not the important question in that moment. Whether or not you can support your child with what they're telling you in this moment is what's important. And, you know, when it comes to, like, if we're talking about gender identity, when it comes to the more important decisions that have other potential, I guess, experiences that are going to be attached. So whether that's social affirmation, medical affirmation, whether, you know, like it's changing names or you're going down the medical road, whatever that might be, there might be repercussions. You might believe that there's going to be repercussions, but those things can happen with conversations. If you're open and you're able to support your child right through that journey, they're going to be much more able to explore their authentic self, rather than feeling like they've got to fight you at every corner. So if they're focused on the fight to prove themselves, then they're not able to do that exploration as easily and as openly as possible. So yeah, it's important to be mindful not to box kids in any kind of form, I think, and just, like you said, be curious with where they're at. What does that mean to you? Yeah. Like you said, and how does that feel, and what would you like from me? How would you like things to be? What do we need to do for you? Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful note to wrap up our conversation on, for sure. I align with that so much. I want to say thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you.
I really, really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to continuing to follow the work that you're doing, because I think that it's really important. If there's ever anything that you can think of that I can do to support you, let me know. And if there's anything you'd like the people that are watching to know of how they can support you, you can use this time to kind of let them know.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, check out my book. It's about you too. It's on Amazon, and it's also available in most bookstores, though a lot of them you need to order it in. It's not on shelves yet, but asking your bookstores to get it in stock. So those parents that are browsing and trying to be subtle to figure out where they can get some help, they might be able to find them. That would be great. Follow me on Instagram, chat with me on Instagram, say hi, let me know what you're up to and what you need. Yeah. So I think we'll pop my links in the comments for this. Yeah. So people
definitely.
can just, go there. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been great chatting with you, and thanks everyone for watching and hanging out with us.
Awesome. Well, it was nice talking to you, and I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, stay in touch. Take care. Bye.
Bye.